The story of where we come from is often fascinating. We tell and explain who we are, often on the basis of the people and the family that we come from. Matthew begins his gospel by telling the story of where Jesus comes from. As you look at the first chapter of Matthew and you examine the genealogy of Jesus, there's some fascinating characters that show up there. For this Thursday series, we're going to be focusing on 4 women who were included in the genealogy of Jesus. Now, when you tell the story of who you are, I would suspect that we would often choose the stories that put our family in the best light. Well, interestingly, that's not where Matthew goes. The stories that we're going to examine are not all nice and pretty. As you discover when you read varying stories, especially throughout the Old Testament, well, and also including some of the characters in the New Testament, not everybody who God chooses to connect to the story of salvation are the nice, crisp, clean stories and the people who you might admire and look up to. Well, this is the case with Tamar, who is the subject of our first conversation here today. Tamar was married to Ur. Ur was the son of Judah. We're familiar with who Judah is. As we read Genesis chapter 38, we discover that Ur dies, leaving Tamar without a child to carry on the family name. Now, the custom at the time was that the next oldest son would then marry his older brother's widow and through her provide children that would be heirs to the older brother. Now, Ur's younger brother didn't want to do this. He opted not to do this. In fact, he flatly refused. Judah then makes a promise to Tamar that his youngest son would, when he's old enough, be offered to her in order to fulfill that obligation. Now, over time, Tamar discovers that Judah has no intention of fulfilling that promise. And so she uses what she has at her disposal in order to ensure that Judah provides as he was expected to do. She basically traps him, posing as a prostitute, in order to have relations with him and produce the heir that his sons, one of them, was supposed to have produced on behalf of their brother. This is one of those dicey stories. And as you read Genesis chapter 38, I'm sure it's one of those stories that you read through and you kind of wonder, how is this a story that's connected to the genealogy and the coming of the Messiah? The story of Tamar and the way God makes sure that the Messiah's line and lineage is carried on is one of those strange and unique stories. It kind of shows us the way in which God chooses the unexpected person, honestly, the morally deficient circumstances and decision-making that take place in their lives. Often, here's the reality, it parallels to some of the things that we do. We may not look at this type of a particular situation and say, yeah, I relate to Tamar, but we make choices that are not always the best. We make decisions that are not always morally upright, and yet God still considers us to be a part of his family, and he desires for us to be a part of his kingdom. Tamar is included as one of the ancestors of Jesus, not because she is a great moral example, but it's more to demonstrate the faithfulness of God, that even when Judah is not doing what he's supposed to do, and Judah's sons are not fulfilling the duty that they're supposed to fulfill, and Tamar is even solving the problem in a way that, honestly, we'd look at it in shock and perhaps disgust. That despite all these circumstances, this is in fact what the Messiah is coming to sort out. It's the coming of the Messiah that is to come and remove sin from our lives. And the story is a demonstration of the varying sins that are really prevalent in our world. It's not really a Christmassy type story, is it? And yet, what does it mean for a story to be Christmassy? Why does Christ need to come? Why do we celebrate the babe in Bethlehem? It's a beautiful picture, but it's a beautiful picture in response to a really ugly reality. An ugly reality that speaks to our sin, and yet it's through sinful decisions that the Messiah comes. What a bizarre story. Hey, there's still more bizarre stories to come. I'll see you next week.